Welcome back to One Big Dark Room. I'm Juniper Quinn. I hope your Thanksgiving, however it looked this year, gave you at least one moment of something you needed, whether that was just a breath, a pause, or something small that reminded you you're still here. We're now coming up on the rest of the holiday season, that strange in-between place where the excitement of the holidays might not match up with how we're feeling inside. This time of year can hold so many contradictions. Joy and heaviness, nostalgia and grief, connection and loneliness, and I think that mix is actually the perfect place to begin today's episode. Because today, I want to talk about the bonds we share with our pets. The ones who feel like family, like comfort, like something in us that recognizes safety. For a lot of us, the holidays aren't just shaped by the people in our lives, they're shaped by the animals who walk through it with us, or the ones we're remembering. And for me, that connection goes deeper than anything I've ever talked about publicly. This episode holds the story of Nala and Shotgun, my soul dogs, and the grief that reshaped everything I thought I knew about myself. It also holds the science behind why animals mean so much to people who have lived through trauma, and how those bonds can change the course of our lives, sometimes in beautiful ways, and sometimes in ways we don't fully understand until much later. So wherever you are, driving home from work, washing dishes, walking your dog, or curled up under your holiday blanket, thank you for being here with me. Let's begin. When we talk about the bond we have with our pets, with our dogs, our cats, or maybe our smaller creatures, it didn't happen suddenly. This relationship is ancient, older than cities and agriculture, older than almost every human tradition we have language for. Dogs were the first to meet us there. Before we had farms, houses, or even a sense of home the way we understand it now, humans and the ancestors of modern dogs were already choosing each other. Genetic evidence shows this happened somewhere between 20 and 40,000 years ago, during the last ice age, when the world was harsh and survival meant cooperation. These weren't modern wolves. They were an older, now extinct population. But over time, the calmer ones, the curious ones, the ones who were less afraid of us, they came closer. It could have been for scraps, maybe for warmth, or maybe because something in them recognized something in us. And we responded. We fed them, we followed them, we learned from them. We built trust with an animal that could just as easily have been a predator. And somewhere along the way, a moment we'll never be able to pinpoint, wolves became dogs, and humans gained a companion species that would shape the rest of our history. Cats came later, and in a totally different way. While dogs evolved alongside our wandering, cats arrived when humans finally settled down. Once we started storing grain, rodents inevitably followed, and small wild cats followed the rodents. Humans tolerated them because they were helpful. Cats tolerated us because we were warm and predictable and had access to mice. Over time, this practical arrangement morphed into something like affection. And in some cultures, it became reverence. In ancient Egypt, cats weren't just tolerated, they were beloved, protected, and even sacred. People kept them in their homes not only to guard food, but as symbols of protection and divinity. Dogs were there too, often as guardians and hunting partners. These animals weren't pets in the modern sense, but they were absolutely companions. Creatures with names and stories. Creatures you grieved when they died. Fast forward thousands of years across empires and continents, and our relationship with pets has kept evolving, but never really lost its emotional core. Today, roughly 94 million households in the U.S. have at least one pet. Dogs are still the most popular. And the way we care for them reflects how deeply they're woven into our lives. Last year alone, Americans spent around $152 billion on their pets. Food, vet bills, toys, grooming, behavioral training, doggy daycare, things our ancestors could have never imagined. But the spending isn't really about consumerism. It's about the role pets play in our emotional landscape. They're family, comfort, stability. There's something warm to come home to at the end of the longest day. In a world that can feel unpredictable, chaotic, or lonely, pets offer something beautifully simple: presence, connection without performance, companionship without conditions, a kind of ancient understanding that has followed us all the way from the Ice Age to the modern living room. So when we talk about the bond we have with our pets, and for me, of course, with my dogs, We're not just talking about something cute or sentimental. We're talking about a relationship written into human history, a bond old enough to be instinctive, a bond we still feel today every time our animals greet us at the door, curl up beside us, or remind us that love doesn't always need words. From here, I'll shift into something I see over and over again in coaching, in my own life, and in stories people tell me about their pets. It's the way people who grew up in chaotic or unsafe homes often form unusually deep, almost immediate connections with animals. Not just, I love my dog, but something deeper, something that feels like recognition, and there's science behind it. When someone grows up without consistent safety, emotionally or physically, the nervous system adapts. It learns to scan for danger, to read micro expressions, tone shifts, footsteps in the hallway. Children in unpredictable homes become experts at tracking the emotional weather around them. But there's something else that happens. When human relationships feel inconsistent, confusing, or frightening, the attachment system doesn't shut down. It simply redirects. It looks for safety wherever it can find it. And animals are, for many trauma survivors, the first beings who feel safe in a way humans never did. There are measurable biological reasons for this sense of safety. Research on trauma and animal-assisted therapy shows that interacting with animals can reduce cortisol, the stress hormone, increase oxytocin, the bonding, soothing, connection hormone, lower heart rate and blood pressure, stabilize breathing patterns, activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and settle state. For someone who grew up dysregulated or hypervigilant, a dog or cat can calm the entire neurobiological system. They're literally helping the brain downshift out of survival mode. Animals don't slam doors. They don't change moods without warning. They don't weaponize silence. Their presence is predictable. Into a nervous system shaped by uncertainty, predictability is medicine. Trauma survivors often talk about feeling too much or not enough. They spent childhood trying to earn affection, avoid punishment, or guess what versions of themselves was safest to be that day. Animals don't require that performance. A dog doesn't care if you're tired or quiet or a little broken or figuring yourself out. They don't interrogate your feelings. They won't ask you to smile when you're hurting. For many people who had to hide parts of themselves to survive, animals offer the first relationship where authenticity is allowed. You can be fully yourself and you're still accepted. There's research showing that dogs, especially, are tuned into human facial expressions, tone of voice, and gesture. Not in a judgmental way, but in a responsive, emotionally attuned way. Animals notice when your voice softens, when your breathing changes, when your shoulders drop, when you're crying, when you're dissociating. For adults who learned as children that their emotions were too much, animals do something revolutionary. They respond to your emotional truth instead of demanding you hide it. They don't ask you to justify your feelings. They don't gaslight you. They simply attune. And attunement is one of the core ingredients of secure attachment, something many trauma survivors never had from caregivers. Attachment researchers sometimes talk about earned security, the idea that a person can move toward healthier attachment patterns later in life through corrective emotional experiences. For many people, that experience begins with a pet. Animals give us consistent presence, predictable behavior, non-judgmental companionship, touch that feels safe, connection without demands. All things that help repattern a nervous system that learned early on that the world isn't safe. And when that repair starts to happen, the bond can feel almost supernatural. Not because it is, though sometimes we feel that it might be, but because it's the first time the body has experienced a relationship without fear. So when someone with a hard past says, "My dog saved my life," it's not an exaggeration. It's biology, psychology. It's attachment. It's survival. Animals meet the nervous system where humans often couldn't. They show us a version of connection that feels gentle, trustworthy, and safe. And for many of us, they become a template for what love is supposed to feel like. It makes perfect sense, scientific sense, why people who have lived through trauma connect so fiercely to their animals. It's not dependency, it's the body recognizing safety, maybe for the first time. So, now to the part where I have to literally fight for my life not to cry through this segment. I want to talk about something that might be the most emotional thing I share in this entire podcast. Even more emotional than the trauma I went through 3 years ago. because this isn't about an event. It's about two souls who shaped the entire story of my life. My dogs, Nala and Shotgun, weren't just pets. They were my family, my soul dogs, in every sense of the word. The kind of connection that isn't polite or practical or surface level, the kind that roots itself in your bones. And the thing is, I got them early, earlier than most people get animals they become solely responsible for. Nala came first. Originally, she was supposed to belong to my high school boyfriend, my first love. Our relationship was complicated, as first loves often are, but somewhere in the middle of that teenage angst, Nala chose me, and I chose her. She became my heart, my anchor, my reason. Then, during my first year of college, I was commuting about an hour every morning. I saw this dog running alongside the road. I pulled over, not really knowing what I was going to do, just knowing I couldn't drive past him. By the time I stopped the car, he was far away. I called out and he ran toward me full speed. And in those few seconds, I braced myself. I didn't know if I was about to be greeted with kisses or mauled. But when he reached me, he started kissing my hands. And then, in a horrifying moment, he darted toward the interstate. I thought I was about to witness something that would shatter me. But instead, he curved, ran straight to the back passenger door of my car, and waited. I sprinted toward the door. I opened it, and he jumped in. And then he immediately climbed into the front passenger seat. So he called Shotgun. And that's how he got his name. I had no intention of keeping him. But by the end of that first day, I knew he was mine. Or maybe I was his. The moment Shotgun met Nala, something unexplainable happened. Not the stiff, careful sniffing dogs usually do, not the cautious circling. It was instant recognition, like two souls remembering each other from a past life. They started playing immediately, like they'd been separated, not introduced. And from that moment on, they were inseparable. They wouldn't know a life without each other ever again. And I wouldn't know a life without them either. They were there for everything. Every heartbreak, every heartbreaker, every version of me I didn't know how to become. My first breakup with that high school boyfriend. The abusive relationship with the man I got engaged to. Losses in my family. Every career shift. Dozens of moves. And I mean dozens. Stability was never something I had, but they were always my home. They were there for my divorce. They were there when the world fell apart. They were there when I felt like I was rebuilding myself from scratch. And no matter what was happening in my life, they were waiting for me. Not because they needed anything from me, except maybe food, but because they loved me, unconditionally, consistently, without fail. I lived my life around them. I didn't have the traditional college experience because they were my priority, my responsibility, my heartbeat. And I don't regret a single day of it, not one. I bought my first house for them. We lived in apartments most of their lives, and all I wanted was to give them space, their own yard, their own home to live out their last years. And I did it. I kept that promise. Nala got sick first, and I have never felt anything as devastating as watching her body fail while her spirit stayed gentle. I carried her outside for months, all 75 pounds of her, because she deserved that. When she passed, my world collapsed. A part of me died with her. She wasn't my dog. She was my soul. 3 months later, Shotgun followed her. I think some souls are simply too entwined to stay separated. He grieved her. He missed her. He wanted to be wherever she was. And even though I wasn't ready, not even a little, I understood. He had spent his whole life loving her. Of course he followed her. Without them, I didn't know who I was. My identity had been built around caring for them, loving them, choosing them, and suddenly I had no one to care for, no purpose anchoring me, no reason to come home. I'm not someone who thinks about leaving the planet. That's never been my path, but after losing Noel and Shotgun, I didn't care what happened to me. I wasn't trying to go anywhere, but I wasn't trying to stay either. I felt like a hollow version of myself, a ghost wearing my skin. I kept it together just enough to function at work, but beyond that, I drifted into a dark place. I made choices I wouldn't have made under any other circumstances. None of it mattered. Nothing mattered without them. And even now, I still grieve them. I think I always will. Some loves imprint on you. Some losses change your shape. They were special in a way I will never be able to fully explain, and I miss them every day. Losing Nolan Shotgun didn't just break my heart, it broke something fundamental in me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to move forward. I wasn't trying to grow or heal or be okay. I was just here, barely. It's important for me to say this clearly because it sets the stage for what comes next. I was in the darkest place I have ever been. Not angry, not dramatic, not impulsive, just profoundly empty. You have to understand the level of grief I was carrying because the decisions I made in the months that followed weren't coming from a whole person. They were coming from the version of me who had lost her entire world. A version who didn't recognize herself without the two souls who had shaped her entire adult life. And that's where the next chapter of my story begins. The choices I made during that time, the people I trusted, the situations I stepped into, the places I allowed myself to be, all of it was influenced by this raw, unhealed grief. It created the perfect condition for something I never imagined could happen to me. When I look back at the period of my life after losing Nolan Shotgun, I see now that it wasn't just grief, it was a complete dismantling of the foundation I had built my life on. And when a foundation cracks, the whole structure becomes vulnerable, not just emotionally, but neurologically, biologically, spiritually. This is where I want to slow down for a minute and talk about what trauma does to us and why people who are hurting often end up in relationships that confuse, overwhelm, or even harm them. This isn't just my story. It's something a lot of people live through without ever understanding why. When someone goes through a profound loss, the brain shifts into a survival-oriented state. Executive functioning, the part of the brain that makes rational decisions, takes a backseat to the emotional centers. You're not thinking with clarity. You're thinking with pain, with fear, with longing. In that state, we don't evaluate people or situations the way we normally would. We cling to anything that feels like comfort, familiarity, or relief. And that's exactly where I was. When Nala was sick, and later when I lost both her and Shotgun, my nervous system was in full crisis. I didn't just lose my dogs. I lost my home, my safety, my purpose, my identity. My entire adult life had revolved around them. When they were gone, I was untethered in a way I had never experienced. If you listened to my first episode, you know that when Nala got sick, I became connected to the man I got engaged to. At that time, I didn't understand what was happening inside me. I only understood the timing. I was scared, overwhelmed, and trying to hold myself together while watching my soul dog fade away. Trauma bonding is often misunderstood. People think it means being attached to the wrong person or not recognizing red flags. But trauma bonding is rooted in intermittent reinforcement, when affection, attention, or comfort comes inconsistently, or with heightened emotional states like fear, grief, or anxiety. When someone offers intensity, reassurance, or emotional closeness during a moment of deep vulnerability, the brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. At the same time, the stress hormone cortisol is high. The combination creates a powerful chemical loop. Comfort, fear, comfort, fear. It's not choosing the wrong person. It's biology trying to survive loneliness. And for people who have older trauma, especially childhood trauma, the wiring for this pattern is often even stronger. Something psychologists talk about is identity fragmentation after trauma or loss. It's when the version of you that existed before can no longer function, but the new version of you hasn't formed yet. This was exactly my reality after losing Nolan and Shotgun. Who was I without them? My life had been built around caring for them. They shaped every routine, every decision, every version of myself. When they were gone, it wasn't just sadness, it was a total identity void. And identity voids are dangerous places because the brain tries to fill them as quickly as possible. With people, with distractions, with intensity, with anything that feels like something. And people who manipulate, they can sense that void instantly. Certain kinds of people gravitate towards individuals who are grieving, isolated or untethered. Not everyone does this, but manipulative personalities often do, because people in pain are less likely to enforce boundaries. They're more likely to interpret intensity as care and more likely to overlook inconsistencies or red flags. They're often craving companionship. They may feel grateful for any attention at all, and they might have a weakened sense of self to push back with. This isn't a character flaw. It's not falling for it. It's the combination of trauma, biology, attachment wounds, grief, and timing. I've learned that manipulative people don't necessarily look for weaknesses. They look for openings. And grief creates openings everywhere. Emotional openings, practical openings, spiritual openings. The pattern I experienced when Nala was sick, when I bonded with someone during immense emotional distress, it wasn't random. It was the first hint that my nervous system, my grief, and my attachment wounds could make me vulnerable to the wrong people. And years later, after losing both Nala and Shotgun, that vulnerability was amplified 1,000-fold. I didn't have the protection of purpose anymore. I didn't have the structure of caregiving. I didn't have the grounding of routine. I didn't have the emotional buffer of unconditional love. I was open in ways I couldn't see. This episode is not where I tell that story, but I am laying the psychological groundwork for it because context matters. To understand the depth of my grief, the collapse of my identity, the biology of trauma bonding, and the vulnerability that comes from lifelong patterns of survival, to understand why what happened next unfolded the way it did. I'm not sharing this to shame myself or anyone listening. I'm sharing it because trauma bonding is common, because grief shifts our judgment, because loneliness changes our perception. Unresolved trauma makes intense relationships feel safe when they aren't, because so many people have lived versions of this and think it means something is wrong with them. Nothing was wrong with me. Something was wrong around me. And now I understand the psychology, the neuroscience, the attachment patterns. I see the landscape clearly. And I'm finally ready to walk with you into the next chapter. I've waited 3 years to tell this part of my story. 3 years of processing, healing, rebuilding myself enough to speak from a place that isn't collapsing under the weight of what happened. 3 years of learning how to hold both the darkness and the truth without letting either consume me. And now I'm ready. In the next episode, I'm going to tell you what happened. I'm going to tell you how grief and emptiness led me into one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. An experience that changed everything. How I see the world, how I trust, how I protect myself, and how I return to my own light. I'm ready to tell it now, and I hope you're ready to hear it, because what comes next is the beginning of a different version of me. The version who had to survive the unimaginable, rebuild her identity, and eventually reclaim her voice, including the one you're hearing right now. Before I end today's episode, I want to take a breath with you because this one held a lot for me. We went from the ancient history of our bond with animals to the science of why pets become our emotional anchors to the deepest personal losses I've ever lived through. And then into the psychology of trauma, vulnerability, and the ways our nervous system can lead us towards people or situations we would never choose from a place of wholeness. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this episode, it's this. None of those patterns mean you're broken. None of those reactions mean you're weak. They mean you're human. And human beings get pulled into relationships that feel like lifelines in the moment, even when they aren't. I know this because I lived it. I lived all of it. And in the next episode, I'm finally ready to tell the story that came next. But I want to do it with intention. I want to do it with grounding. And I want to do it in a way that honors not only my own healing, but the healing journey so many of you are on too. So, next time, I'm going to open up a chapter of my life I've kept closed for a long time. A chapter that explains how grief, trauma bonding, identity collapse, and emotional vulnerability created the perfect storm for one of the hardest experiences I've ever survived. I won't be sharing details that compromise my safety or the legal process, but I will be sharing the emotional truth, the part that belongs to me, the part I can finally speak without shaking. So if you've ever wondered how a person ends up in a situation they should have seen coming, if you've ever judged yourself for trusting the wrong person, if you've ever felt ashamed of a relationship you stayed in because leaving felt impossible, or if you've ever been shattered by grief and found yourself reaching for anything that felt like solid ground. I've been there, and I'm with you. Thank you for being here with me today, for listening, for holding this space, and for witnessing a part of my story that shaped everything that followed. So, until the next episode, stay familiar.